Every day we wake up in a slightly different world than yesterday. In order to keep up with it, we have to learn, we have to know how to innovate, we have to adapt to the change. And when we are at learning, we have a perfect guest for that today with us. It's a man with the most beautiful name in the world, Ivan. Ivan, welcome to the change.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm really sure that we will learn a lot about what you are doing, but first we would like to learn a little bit about yourself and about the changes and leaps that you took during your life in order to become what you are now. And let's start from also one perfect neighborhood in in Serbia, capital of Serbia, Belgrade. The neighborhood name is Dorčol, and since we grew very near one to each other, tell me your story and first big change that happened in your life. Was it 2004 or was it something maybe before?
It was around about that time. We actually didn't know each other at the
Yeah,
time when we were growing
yeah.
up, which is kind of funny. We only got together when we both moved to Dubai, which is an interesting.
Same name, same neighborhood, and then we met in
Exactly,
Dubai, which
exactly.
is that's life.
Exactly. So listen, I'm born and raised basically in Belgrade. Spent most of my youth and kind of early adulthood time in Belgrade in Dorčol. Basically went to school there, went to high school there, graduated from university there, started working there. So for all intents and purposes, I thought my path was pretty much kind of all set, right? As
As a guy from Dorčol, then
Yes.
not too many paths.
Yes. Now, one thing happened was in 2002, I went to serve in the army. You remember the army service at the time
Of
was
course, yeah,
mandatory,
yeah.
so I had to basically pay my dues for some 9 months. And as you may know, when you are serving in the army, you have a lot of free time to think, right? Your body gets exhausted,
Yeah.
but your mind not necessarily.
Yeah.
So it gave me a lot of time to think about and to ponder what I want to do, who I want to be when I grow up, where do I want to go next. And pretty much at that time, an idea arose in my mind that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to kind of get off the beaten path. I wanted to go somewhere, go beyond, expand my horizon, basically leave the country and kind of test my
Abilities.
capabilities elsewhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. Many things happen because there are people who went to serve the army. There are people who didn't go, but you can always tell, as you said, there is a lot of time to think in the army and doing some things that maybe your mind is wandering somewhere else. Basically, that was the growing up thing. I would say, of course, there were a lot of challenges growing up, but in the army, I came back from the army, serving the army, and I was like, okay, from now on, I want to live on my own, like my own. Why? There was no reason. But still, I don't know what happens in the army. So that's maybe the first big change happening. It isn't easy. It lasts for 1 year. I don't know how long you were there, but it lasts for 1 year. But still, so what happened there? What was your thinking? I want to go away from this country, or I want to see the world, or I want to, what happened?
It's more the latter. So basically, like I knew I wanted to do something different, right? Because if I think about my path thus far, I spent most of my time at home in my parental home, right? So
of course.
even when I was at the university, the system that we have in Serbia, you do not have dorm rooms for people who actually live in Belgrade. So I did go to university. I did attend classes at university, but kind of going from my parental home, getting to university, and then going back. And then when I started working after university, again, I went to work from my parental home. So for all intents and purposes, like my immediate surrounding never really changed up until the time when I went to serve in the army. This was the first time when I really left home for the first time, if you will, and this was the first time when I could really start pondering how things could actually be different and how change is not necessarily something to be super afraid of.
That's for sure. But I just have to tell one thing that in Serbia, it's not that unusual that you're living with your parents for a long time.
Yeah.
That's how it goes in Serbia. So you had your time on your own and you decided to go. Where did you go? What university you studied in Serbia?
Traffic and transport engineering.
Okay, and then you went to MBA.
Yes.
How
Yes.
close is that?
So here's the thought process. So once I realized that I wanted to go elsewhere, once I realized I wanted to go someplace abroad, there were basically two paths that I could think of.
Yeah.
Either I could go and start working in the area that I have been basically trained for, which was not very easy in terms of getting a visa, getting a residence, actually applying for a job from outside of the country. It's not an easy path, right?
Yeah.
A much easier path is to actually go abroad and study, and this is what a lot of people from Serbia end up doing, right? Either study for their for their basic studies, or kind of for the undergraduate, or for graduate studies. Now, if I decided to go abroad and study, again, there were two interesting paths that I could take. One of them was to go and specialize even further in my basic area of expertise, which would be traffic and transport engineering, which would essentially mean focusing more on the academia, right?
Yeah.
Go and do my master's, go and do my PhD, and essentially kind of end up basically lecturing at a university or doing some research work, right? So there was one path. The other path that I could think of at the time was do something a little bit more general, so use my undergrad studies as kind of a bit of a starting point, if you will, but then go and essentially try to get some breadth, especially when it comes to business administration, become more of a business person rather than an academician. And the latter one is the one that I've decided to go for.
There are things, people saying pro and con the education, like universities, and because they're backing up now, like they're not following the industry development and change, but for sure, when you talk to some with some people that do not know too much about business or something, my kid will go either Harvard or either Stanford. So you chose one of those. How did you got in there?
So it's really funny because especially when and you mentioned MBA, and this is the program that I went through. Now, if you were to back up, right, back in 2002, and if you were to put me in the context of Serbia, not that many people in my immediate surrounding actually knew about what MBA was in the first place. It's not like in other countries where you have people who can contextualize it for you, people who have gone themselves or have friends who have gone there, so can actually give you an idea as to what it is in the first place, right? For me, it was a bit of a discovery. First of all, what MBA was to begin with, and what it started up with, and this was the time when the internet has kind of become a little bit more popular.
Yeah.
I think I've just dated myself, but I guess the internet back then in 2002 was a little bit different than now in 2019. But still, we had access to data, right? And if you think about coming from a country which is essentially in the middle of nowhere compared to kind of the more business focused centers such as the US or London or Western Europe, the only way for me to actually gather that data was through the internet. So I went online and I started researching. I applied
and this keyword started popping up.
Keyword started popping up. Yeah, exactly. And kind of went through all sorts of forums just to kind of get people's experiences in terms of what it meant. Mm-hmm. But then in terms of kind of picking up the one that I would go for, honestly, I didn't know any better. So I just went with one of the rankings. So the ranking basically said Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. These are the three that I actually applied to, without knowing any better.
Okay, so you apply but people, Harvard and Stanford, they're worldwide phenomenons, and people would like to go to either of them. How did you choose Stanford, or did Stanford choose you? And what is the difference between? Tell us. You were there for two years, isn't? And tell us the difference between one and another.
Yeah, so it's hard to tell because I went to Stanford, I never went to Harvard, so I cannot compare the two, right? It's a little bit hard to do. I think in hindsight, when I compare not only myself but also a lot of people that I know who have gone to Stanford, and then a lot of people that I know who have also gone to Harvard, you have slightly different cultures of both schools. Both are great schools by any stretch of imagination. Harvard is a much bigger school, so it's also much better recognized in terms of a brand name, and it's also a much older school, right? Harvard is more than 300 years old, whereas Stanford is roughly 100 plus years old. And so you have that brand recognition that kind of goes much more heavily for Harvard. Also, if you think about where they're located, obviously Stanford benefits from the fact that it's kind of smack in the middle of the Silicon Valley. So a lot of things that are related to entrepreneurship and tech and venture capital, kind of all the supporting and enabling industries are very heavily Stanford influenced. Whereas if you look at kind of the more traditional business world, from consulting to banking, kind of the more traditional corporations, you will probably find an inordinate amount of Harvard grads there as well.
You mentioned that being close to Silicon Valley means something, but also people usually mention school is cool, but networking is the thing. And is it really?
It's incredibly important. I think that's basically what makes it or breaks it. So I'll give you just a very specific example when it comes to Stanford and me attending school, and then the opportunities that actually allows you to. So we had one of the classes in my second year, which was called Evaluating Entrepreneurial Opportunities. The idea for that class is basically you find 4, 5, 6 like-minded students. You form a group of people who would basically come up with the idea, write up the business plan, get a mentor, like an actual VC from the Silicon Valley. Our team got a mentor from Kleiner Perkins, which is, as you might know, one of the most famous venture capital firms, and essentially go ahead as far out as testing the concept and potentially even going and raising the funds. We have worked on that project for 2 full terms, so essentially almost 12 months. The team that we have worked with, 2 out of 5 people have actually went ahead after graduation, started up a company, raised funds, and ended up selling the company. So from a class project, right, you get the opportunities of getting mentorship from both the faculty as well as people from the industry and venture capitalists and what have you, and it literally gives you an opportunity to test out the idea in the wild and literally make a class project into a company with an exit.
That's growing up for sure.
Indeed.
When teacher ask you and you get a grade, that means you learned something. But this is a real life, and that's what hard. So so this helped you, but you were close. Like they say, the things happen not only on the university but around it. There you can buy some, I don't know, VC or some startup or someone who needs you, who knows who, and I think that's also something that. So what would you advise, let's say, to young people with an idea, with willing to learn? Does it really matter if you are in Belgrade, Serbia, or whatever other country, and Silicon Valley is a world phenomenon? So does it really matter? I have a friend. He's an amazing expert. He's a web developer, teaching web development, and head of the dean. How do you say this? Head of cathedra.
Okay.
Yeah, is it? And then he's a blockchain expert, whatever. I tell him that I sense that, because I sense that when I moved here. Go to Silicon Valley. Don't waste your time. Just be there. Take 6 months, a year. Just go there. He can afford it, and he can go. Just go there. Your mindset will change.
Yeah. I think that's the right angle. I think when you say mindset, I think that's incredibly important. I think on one hand, first of all, the world has become a much smaller place, obviously, right? Because of the connectivity, and we can now all work remotely. You can get access to pretty much anyone that you want in the world within a couple of degrees of separation. So is it possible to do stuff remotely? It absolutely is possible to do stuff remotely. But I think an added benefit to being somewhere is actually the mindset and the environment that you're surrounded by, right? Because as you know, in our culture, and that's I think a very important, there is a degree of shame associated with failing, right? If you fail, you're a failure. If you're a failure, that means that there is a negative perception of who you are, your capabilities. It makes it more difficult for you down the road because you have failed once, right? So it's almost a culture that actually rewards people who do not try, because if you do not try hard enough, then you do not fail, and if you do not fail, then there is no kind of failure aura around you, if you will, right? Versus what's happening in the Silicon Valley, whereby you see all these people who are trying very hard, and if you do not try hard, if you do not fail, that's actually looked down on, because it means that you are not trying hard enough. right? So I think that mindset in particular, especially for the people who are kind of on the edge and need a little bit of a nudge, if you will, to kind of jump and become an entrepreneur, is what can make it or break it.
You were in touch with VC funds or any angel investors, whatever. They say they do not want to invest money in someone who didn't fail before, because that's the biggest growing up school, being mature. Like in failure, that's the if like fool me once, it's on me. Fool me twice, fool me once, it's on you. Fool me once, it's on me. So okay, if you learn, if you so with all this experience you had after the army, you come to States. That was a shock to you, to your family, to your people around. Now, as you said, things are becoming. The world is much smaller place because of connectivity. We have daily flights to Serbia and Belgrade from here. But States at that time, 2004, that was an endeavor. That was like, and especially let's say the West Coast. You know, like
it was interesting. And this is kind of what you know how we all have like pictures that kind of stay in our minds, kind of engraved forever. One of the pictures for me, or one of the moments that kind of remained engraved, was me getting into my dorm room at Stanford with one big bag, 32 kilos. That was the absolute maximum that I could actually get. Getting into that room, having those doors automatically closing behind me, with making this kind of a thumping sound. Me sitting on the bed and just thinking, I'm actually 10,000 kilometers away from anyone I know. Everyone I know is not only away, they're actually sleeping at this point in time. I have no one to talk to, no one even near where I currently am, and just kind of feeling this kind of this sense of loneliness and the sense of fright, if you will.
Terrifying.
It's terrifying. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. That moment, I keep remembering as a moment of terror.
But people are afraid of that, and this is what we always say: the only constant thing in life is change.
Absolutely.
So you cannot live life without change. And you should be afraid. Every change is a scary moment in life. But as they say, the boat is the safest in the harbor, but it's not meant to be.
Exactly.
So you skip this. You were there. You got some amazing experience, amazing networking, a really good thing. And what's next? What's the next leap? What's the next change that happens after the university? You got some employment.
Yeah, so you gotta, when you're studying, obviously there are a lot of people coming to you because it's a school with good reputation. There are a lot of companies coming to hire on campus. I got hired by a consulting company called Buzan Hamilton with an office in San Francisco. Moved to the city, which is from Stanford campus. It's around 60 kilometers, so it's not considered a big move. Yeah. Kind of from the magnitude of change perspective, it wasn't that big of a change. Moved there, started working there, worked there for a couple of years, and then at some point, 2 years in, there was an email that came out. It was a global email, basically. The company that I was with at the time, they had a thriving and booming business here in the Middle East. They didn't have people to essentially to fully staff it, and they were looking for people who were willing to come here on a temporary 2-year transfer, kind of test their skills and essentially kind of contribute to the business. And once the two-year limit is basically over, go back to their home offices and continue on with their careers, right? And I thought at the time, what the heck? I've never been to the Middle East before. I mean, the only thing that I knew about the Middle East was what you kind of knew from the 6 o'clock news, which was never good news. It was always people dying or bombs or terrorism or what have you, right? But at the end of the day, I thought to myself, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? I could go there for the first year. I'm just going to go there and explore. It's going to be a great and interesting experience. The second year, even if I am bored, even if I think it hasn't been a good move, I'm going to be back before I know it, right? And I'm going to be living in, on a beachfront, 365 days of sun, tax-free living. At the time, I was also repaying my student loans. Stanford is a great school, but it's not a cheap school. So obviously, that kind of came into the decision making. So essentially, what ended up happening was I sold all of my stuff that I had in the States. bought myself a one-way ticket on Qatar Airways via Doha to Dubai, and literally a couple of weeks after, I found myself in Dubai for the first time.
But your thinking was really what is interesting. You said, okay, what's the worst that can happen? That's one thinking that always I think should be in everybody's mind. You know, what's the worst? Okay, there are some people that do not have countries literally to go back to, so they have to stay here. At any point, and whatever happens, so at any point you can come back to your country and continue that. But I like your approach because you're always looking from a brighter side. Of course, you should consider all pros and cons and everything, but still, I think that this is something that is pushing you, and that is it's not like you don't have a fear of change. Yes, you have fear of change, but you're telling, okay, what's the worst that happen? That's it. And then you came to this really beautiful country. Everything is, let's say, in order. Everything peaceful. No crime, no drugs. No, it's really nice to be in. And many people that come here say, "Oh, I'm coming for a year or two." Yes, you are. Yes. As we all do.
Fast forward 11 years, I'm still here, right?
Yeah. So what happened in these 11 years? So you started working with a consultancy company, but then, and this is your company now also, you came to Google. So this is, I would say, should be the dream of many of our viewers, younger viewers. You know, like go to Stanford and then go work to Google with Google. You know, so how
living
that
the dream, really.
You're living the dream. 2 kids, nice wife. You know, that's sorry. Yeah. 2 small kids, 1 big kid, and what can you ask for? Yeah. Okay. So how did you cross to Google? How did they approach you? You approach them?
So maybe first, before we go there, maybe to give you a bit of an idea as to why I decided to stay here in the first place, right? When the 2 years kind of expired, I felt that the impact that I could have here was such an order of magnitude bigger than anything that was happening in the US. If you think about the US, it's a large system that just needs a little bit of lubing or a little bit of tweaking around the edges, right? And as a consultant, that's kind of what you do, right? You help them increase the efficiency of X by a very small percentage point, because everything is very well thought through, 350 million people, most of them very smart, and so on and so forth. Then I come here, and one of my first projects that they actually throw me on is in one of the neighboring countries, where I go and meet basically the ruler of the country, or kind of on the ruler's court, and they say something along the following lines: we want to build a railway system in this country. We have no infrastructure. We have no operational experience. We don't have people that can help that can operate it. We don't have the educational system. We don't have the rules, regulations, or the standards. The only thing that we do have is $32 billion. So maybe you can help us with this, right? So kind of from an order of magnitude perspective, if you think from it being professionally rewarding, it was much more professionally rewarding, and the kind of impact that I could have in this region, I felt was orders of magnitude bigger than the US, which is why I decided to stay. And then to your point about why and how I switched to Google after 5 or 6 years in a consulting firm. It's a tough life, right? To be perfectly honest, there is no work-life balance. You work a lot, so that came into the equation as well. But the opportunity that arose was when one of my friends from Booz and Company that I was working with at the time, he basically got hired into Google to manage their operations in the Middle East, and he needed somebody who was a transportation expert to manage the largest part of the business, which is the global airlines that we have here, right, between Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways. So I switched based on my transportation knowledge, so now kind of making a full circle to my undergrad studies and Faculty of Transport and Traffic Engineering. I switched basically to Google to manage the airline business, and then kind of slowly expanded from that to the rest of travel, financial services, government, public sector, and so on and so forth. So that's how that change happened.
So always the change is something that is driving you. As you said, the changes of big magnitude. And here also working with a number one world company, for sure you can make some impact. Even what you do now is interesting, which we'll talk about a bit later. But what I want to talk about now is this. Everybody imagine, and when I came to visit you, of course, it is that relaxed atmosphere. Everybody is, like either playing ping pong or billiard or whatever. Like you have all those games and everything, relax points and food and everything. But also it's interesting. The hiring process in Google is very strict, and they want really to have the best team there is. So how long it took you to jump into the Google?
So it took me a while for a couple of different reasons. First of all, the office here is not super big, and the role that they wanted me for was not necessarily open at the time. So the guy who basically made the switch from consulting to manage the office waited for the right opportunity. So we first started discussing it, I think, as early as 2011 or 2012, and the actual move happened only in 2013. So it took a while. The process itself also took probably 3 to 4 months. There's obviously a range of interviews that you need to go through, and they're looking for a number of different things, from what they call the general and cognitive abilities, which is essentially how smart you are, to role-related knowledge, which is how well are you kind of suited for the role that you're supposed to be playing, to leadership, which is how well can you kind of thrive in teams, how well can you lead the teams, and then finally what they call Googleness, which is really a cultural fit, which is very interesting. As you know, Google has a very specific culture. Not everyone can kind of fit into it, and they're very jealous about keeping it that way. So that process kind of took another 3 to 4 months until kind of we got to a point where I decided to jump ship and join Google.
What was your at the time you mentioned you were working with the transportation, hospitality, and government.
So transportation, infrastructure, and government. Yes.
Yeah, and basically those are the bigger clients on the market. And was it obviously, because we know the outcome of it, now you are heading the Google office, if I can tell that way, in that way, for Saudi Arabia, which is a much bigger country and the biggest country in the region, and so definitely it was challenging. What was the first time when you met some rulers or some big shots from the transportation and companies? Like was that scary also? What kind of that change?
Yeah, it was. I think that happened for the first time when I started here in consulting, and I've given you an example of the railway project. I think one of the things that we have here, because there's a lot of investment going into specific sectors, and quite frankly, we also have a lack of capabilities across different areas. Being a consultant has actually been a great education for me as well, both in terms of actually learning how to deal with things, how to analyze things, so kind of more the hard skills, but even more so the soft skills. So being in the company, presenting to, communicating with some very high level decision makers, the ministers, the director generals, even the rulers at certain cases, has been a great education.
Yes, and just let's, as much as we can, go a little bit about Saudi Arabia and opening of Saudi Arabia, changes that are going out there. I had a meeting with some people from construction recently. They said that more than half of their companies are in Saudi Arabia now, to the Red Sea and everything opening up and blooming. Probably it's not easy, but the change is happening within the country.
Absolutely. So I first started going there in 2008 to 2009, and I can tell that the pace of change in the last year or two is an orders of magnitude bigger than what used to happen in the years before. And especially because since they elected a new crown prince and a new leadership, you can see there is a palpable change of trying to transform the country and getting it to the next level. Not only from an infrastructure point of view, even though that is also very visible. So things like the Riyadh Metro, the big projects such as the Red Sea and what have you, but also in the sentiment that is very palpable, that people know and understand that they need to basically join the global community.
Do you have some friends from Stanford in Saudi
I do.
Arabia?
In fact, I have quite a few friends. We have sometimes I'm actually not joking. I'm an adjunct member of the Stanford Club of Saudi Arabia, and funny enough, I have a presentation in Riyadh on April 21st. Talking about e-commerce in MENA, which is one of the things that we're trying to push from Google perspective. So I'll be speaking there in front of 200 Stanford grads and Stanford friends, just telling them a little bit about how e-commerce is coming and how e-commerce is changing, the traditional retail, which is one of the biggest industry areas in Saudi and beyond.
For sure. And so we can talk now about the changes in the industry. What is really interesting? We can start from e-commerce. What is the general idea of this presentation that you will tell them and present to them?
Yeah. So if you think about e-commerce, it's very easy to look at it from two different angles, right? One is what is happening in the U.S. You have the rise of Amazon, especially in the last 10 or so years, that has eaten a lot of lunch, if you will, of the more traditional retailers. You have the fact that a lot of traditional retailers have gone bankrupt. Amazon is becoming a bigger and bigger of a beast and a bigger of a competitor in terms of the overall retail, and it's not going away anytime soon, right? More and more stuff is being sold through the internet, through the e-commerce channels, and it's interesting to kind of see how both the traditional businesses as well as the pure player internet businesses are kind of reacting to that. So that's one angle, right? Another interesting angle that we look at it from an e-commerce perspective is what is happening of all the places China. If you look at some of the most interesting things that are actually happening in e-commerce, they're not happening in the Western world. They're actually happening in China. And if we look at the amount and the e-commerce penetration, which is very simply the amounts that are being kind of transferred in e-commerce transaction versus traditional transactions, it's almost 20% in China versus around 16% in the UK and around 13% in the UK. So people in China and in Asia more broadly are actually even more e-commerce friendly, even more digitally savvy. So a lot of things that we're seeing are actually happening in China rather than here. And then the point that we're trying to make is essentially that in between these two worlds, it's very interesting to see how them coming here, because they are coming. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and we're already seeing a lot of signs that things are happening. So Amazon has bought Souk, and there are a number of Chinese players that are actually starting to play here in the region. The whole point is to basically understand how the current traditional retail that we have here in the region, which is predominantly driven by the agency and franchises, so the big family businesses having franchises for all sorts of different brands, how is that going to come in and disrupt the way that we do business in retail, which I think is absolutely fascinating.
So that's basically another giant change that is going on. You came here to this market because the changes are much bigger than in US. Then you started working in KSA in Saudi Arabia, where the everything is starting from scratch, let's say, not from a scratch, but they are aware of that, and they will for sure change. E-commerce is definitely, as you said, Amazon is the biggest, but also in transportation, something happened recently in this region. Uber
acquiring Careem,
yeah, and also there were some investors from Saudi, I think, within the Careem. So that's also interesting thing to see that they are aware of things that are going on, and that they will probably implement it very fast, with all the learnings from the other.
Actually, funny enough, on both sides, because one of the biggest investors in Uber is from Saudi. So Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia has a 5.2% ownership of Uber, and in addition to that, the SoftBank Vision Fund, which owns another 16% of Uber, is half owned by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. So Saudis are actually probably the largest, or some of the largest investors in Uber, and then obviously Careem is also funded by a lot of Saudi money from Saudi Technology Ventures through Al Tayyar. And what have you. So it's Saudis buying Saudi, if you will. It's interesting. So, but
Karim is local Uber. It was local Uber.
Yes.
Now they merged or Uber
They
acquired.
got acquired
yeah,
for
yeah,
$3.1
yeah.
billion. Yeah,
Yeah,
the largest investment or acquisition in the region, which I think is extremely important because if we talk about the entrepreneurship here in particular in the MENA area, this is going to be kind of an inflection point where a lot of people will now start looking to Karim and thinking, well, why can I not do that? Right, and I think it's going to give rise to a lot of interesting ideas and hopefully companies as well.
That's for sure the thing that we are looking. Maybe we are not worth billions now with this vlog, but we are really trying to inspire people to take the leap, to go to the change. Everyone is afraid of the change, but still you can manage that fear and you can think of the best outcomes, worst outcomes, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. But when we talk about innovations, and this is where Google is one of the, if not the most innovative company in the world, can you tell me what are the direction Google is looking into the future with? Like what is the main thing and main talk now within the Google?
So I think the biggest change, if I can use this word,
I infected you, sir.
Absolutely,
Like a virus,
absolutely.
the change.
Has happened a couple of years ago, and I don't know if you follow that, but basically we got restructured, we pivoted, if that's a proper word for a hundreds of billions for such a large company. We pivoted into an artificial intelligence first company. We basically, that's Sundar Pichai, who's our then CEO and our now CEO, came out and said that artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to be at the core of everything that we do, right? So if there's a lot of talk around what artificial intelligence is in the first place. There's more talk now than there was in 2016, obviously, but a lot of what Google does, if there's one kind of team that pertains to a lot of different areas that we play in as a company, it's artificial intelligence.
So, of course, again, for the people not so much into the artificial intelligence, it's not Skynet, it's not Terminators.
It's not killer robots, no.
Not the robot. But basically, you explained me that there are three things that are crucial for artificial intelligence or machine learning thing. That are.
So a lot of people ask why now, right? I mean, if you think about it, the concept, the actual philosophy of a lot of approaches that are now being used in artificial intelligence are actually, funny enough, decades old. They come from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And people ask, why is it happening now? Why hasn't it happened before? And there are essentially three things that are coming into play right now, right? First of all, artificial intelligence is fed by data. That's where it all starts. If you think about artificial intelligence as a vehicle, as a car, data is its fuel. Right? It doesn't run if there is not enough fuel. If you look at the data, if you look at all the data that is being generated in the last, say, couple of years, and the data can take all sorts of different forms, from our tweets or interactions on social media, to the photos that we're taking, to this vlog that we are recording and is going to go online, to location that we are revealing through by our cell phones, and so on and so forth. We produce a lot of data. In fact, so much so that the amount of data that has been essentially produced and recorded in the last 2 years is greater than the amount of data that has been recorded in the rest of the human history. That's how fast it goes, right? So if you were kind of to draw that graph, it would go exponentially. So that's the first part.
Okay, so when you gather all of the, I think I have a friend, and he will be definitely the one to visit us in this vlog, and he's a big data scientist. And one thing is having the data, but knowing what to do with it and how that's the challenge now. We learned, and as you said, we are all carrying devices, locations, searches, pictures, recognition, whatever. But now what to do with this data? That's the next step, I would say, for the.
Absolutely. So the second part, which is of the three part thing, is actually the processing power, right? Having the data on one hand is nothing if you do not have processing power to actually make sense out of it, right? And if you look at the processing power, I think this is where I would invoke Moore's law, that basically says that the amount of processing power gets essentially doubled every 18 or so months. We're looking at yet another exponential function, right? And a lot of people kind of look at our cell phones and say, well, this particular cell phone has orders of magnitude higher processing power than all the computers that we use to land the man on the moon. Right, that's kind of what we're looking at. But there is more and more processing power, and if you were to believe the Moore's law would continue to some point in the future, there will be an exponential amount of processing power coming as well, right? So you marry huge amounts of data with huge amounts of processing power, and the fact that now finally artificial intelligence has kind of come out of the weeds. So a lot of universities are basically educating data scientists, machine learning scientists, AI scientists, who are coming with different ways of looking at these algorithms and essentially kind of expanding them and then perfecting them further. So these three coming together is basically why now AI is becoming kind of the hot story of the year, if you will, and why some people who look at the future in a more kind of risk-averse and kind of concerning way have their nightmares about the killer robots and Skynet.
Yeah, definitely makes it can make your life easier to the point that, as you said. There are some more soft skills and some other skills that computers cannot do, or machine learning cannot do at the time now.
Yes.
At the time, then this is something maybe to develop more and more, and definitely to keep the pace with all the. How do you say, amazing amount of data you're getting.
Yeah.
So right now there are a lot of machine learning in, as you said, AI first company. Google is AI first company. That means that probably in all products or most of the products of Google there is machine learning. I specifically like the one in photos, the app Photos, which when you can search by person. Yep. And I love when he asks me, like, is this the same person? Is this the same person? And I think that more than 90% he's right. Just recently, I was there, and a friend of mine, a triathlon guy, he just finished a South African triathlon, and he was finished in the finishing line, but his picture was like this, and then his normal picture,
Yeah.
And then Photos asked me, is this the same person? I said, I cannot recognize it. At some point you say that some skills, not some skills, but skills are much more developed within the machine.
So we have gotten to a point, and it has been a long time coming, right? So obviously it's an evolution and things have changed quite a bit, but we have gotten to a point, for example, where the vision recognition, for the most part, of some of the most advanced machine learning algorithms are actually higher in terms of the accuracy than a regular human eye. And I can show you a couple of photos later on when we can compare a Chihuahua to a muffin. It would probably take you and I a little bit longer to recognize which one is a blueberry muffin versus which one is a Chihuahua. I mean, no pun intended to the Chihuahua owners, obviously. But machines can actually start doing these things faster and more accurate than us. I think the other example is, that more and more people actually communicate with either their phones or their home devices via voice. Voice recognition is also a machine learning and artificial intelligence product as well. And you remember way back when people would get super annoyed with the fact that the machine would not be able to recognize what they're talking about because of their accent or because they're not using the right words or what have you. Now we've gotten to a level where you can very seamlessly communicate with a machine, again, your phone or your home device or what have you. And the level of accuracy, the level of recognition is actually quite high.
That's also, as you have Google Home, I have Google Home. That's for sure a thing. I would say the thing of the future, because in media industry also podcasts, and we are playing this vlog also as a podcast. It are also coming back, and the audio is pretty big in the present, and it will be for sure in the future. But how do you see the future? What is the next step? What the future holds, and it would be very interesting to hear someone from Google to because probably you have so much data in your head and going to presentation and everything. What the future holds?
So this is probably as good time as any to say that any of the statements and the claims that I make are my own and not that those of my employer, right? Just for compliance purposes. Listen, it's tough to say. I don't think that any one of us can look at it and kind of define the future as it is. Even if you were to go back a couple of years ago, you wouldn't probably be able to describe the present that we live in, even if it's a near future. But there are definitely some trends that we can look at and we can potentially speculate as to where they would end and what kind of impact they would have. I'll give you one example. We spoke briefly about it from Kareem Uber / transportation industry, right? One of the things that people are looking right now, and as you know, Google is involved in that as well, is the self-driving cars. Right, we have gotten to a point where we have a certain relatively high level of accuracy. We have some pilots in the U.S. where in some isolated geographic areas we have self-driving cars as taxi service and so on and so forth. Right. So one of the interesting hypotheses that we could draw would be what kind of impact would that have on different industries if this were to roll out to actually make up the majority of the fleets, if you will, kind of the majority of our transportation needs. So transportation as a service, right? And interesting angles that you could look at in terms of, for example, if you are a car company, if you're Ford or General Motors or Fiat or what have you, how does that change who's buying your car? If all of a sudden no individuals are buying your car, it's the transportation companies that are buying your car, right? What does that mean for somebody like Porsche who excels on the branding and kind of selling to people who have confidence issues, if you will? What would that mean for their business model, right? Or another angle whereby in a number of different markets, in a number of different cities, if you will, more than 30 to sometimes even 40% of the overall areas of the city is dedicated to parking. Right?
Yeah.
If you have self-driving cars and that are not being owned by anyone, that you just call on demand, you don't have a need for that amount of parking. What does that mean for urban redevelopment? How can that be redevelop further? If you're doing a commute in a self-driving car, would you be willing to do a commute that is twice as long or 3 times as long if you could actually sit in the backseat of your car, actually do the work rather than actually driving and being stuck on a freeway, right? So I think this is an interesting example, maybe a very small one, but how one particular trend that we can kind of see developing, if we were to roll it out and project it further into the future, would basically have trickle-down effects on all sorts of industries, both intended as well as unintended.
That's for sure. You know how they say, I don't know if translation is good, but the you cannot forget the first love. So you started with transportation, and you're talking about the future.
Indeed, that's very true.
In transportation.
That's very true.
For sure, and that's a nice eclipse that we had during this conversation, and many things. Like when we talk now about autonomous vehicles, it's the change, and we are afraid of that. If we are talking about also autonomous flying vehicles and flying vehicles, that's the change. And oh no, what will happen? Like when Teslas first came with electric cars, it was like no, it's electricity, something will happen.
Yep.
So for sure there is always some change fright, as we can call it.
Yes.
But
But a counterpoint to that is that the only thing that is constant in life is actually change, right? Whether you want it or not, things are going to change around you, and we do not live in a world from 2 years ago, from 4 years ago. And for all that it's worth, I would say that the only thing that we can be sure of, that the change is going to accelerate and not decelerate. And the world that we're going to be living in the next 5 to 10 years, or we started a conversation with the 3 children that I have, the world that they will inhabit is going to be very, very different than the one that we inhabit.
This is so nice closure to this talk. I don't want to finish this talk, but for sure let's have a chat sometimes more, because really inspiring what you said. The thing is, maybe the right way, as you mentioned, kids, is to educate kids for only one thing, and that is the change, and to be for them possible to see the change, foresee what will, and go for it. You know, that's maybe the best education. Of course, besides Stanford, you know, no Harvard, just Stanford. It's a good one. Ivan, thank you very much for being in the vlog. The change.
Thank you for having
I think
me.
you know when we started talking about you coming to the to this vlog was like, what will we talk about? But all that we talk about was change. You know, from the beginning, and that's really nice and very inspiring. Thank you very much. I really wish you so many. How do I put this? So many changes in your life of big magnitude, because I see that this is what you are following, and who knows, next time we'll speak which project you will be in, and but definitely something different than now.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, Ivan, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
So you heard all about it. The change. How many times we mentioned that, and the only purpose of this vlog is to inform you about the new things happening. And I coming from Ivan, well, it was really inspiring. And for you, there is nothing less. If you watched all this vlog, I think we deserve for you to like and subscribe to this channel. And of course, wait for the next amazing guest like this one was. Thank you very much.